BSD has many characters. Bold opener, I know. If I were to ask you to list down every single one of them in a web and connect every character to one they're related to by parallels and relationships, you'd create a really messy web. That's because every character is interlinked with someone else. Kunikida and Fyodor, Koyo and Verlaine, Odasaku and Akutagawa, Ango and Tachihara, the list goes on and on. So imagine my surprise when I'm watching BSD and I'm met with someone who I'd say is the most unique and interesting character that we've had in forever. But more than that, one that was almost independent of this web. It was in his outfit, black and white, to symbolize his internal conflict with himself. It was in his refreshing attitude after arcs of constant back and forth conflict. It was his motives and how deeply I related to him and his desperacy to be free. That's right, bitches. It's finally happening. Cash is analyzing Nikolai. It took me like 10 videos to get to it, but we got here and that's good. But before I dive into things, allow me to preface this analysis by saying that I will be referring to the anime character as Nikolai. I recently tweeted out asking Ukrainian fans for their input on whether it's disrespectful to use this Russian translated name for a Ukrainian author, and the general consensus was that it's okay to use both names. The author Nikolai Gogol, sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong by the way, was of Ukrainian origin but spent most of his life in Russia and even wrote in Russian. So for clarification purposes, I'll refer to the anime boy as Nikolai and the IRL author as Mikola. Now, as far as the character goes, I'd say that Nikolai is one of my favorites in modern manga and ever actually. And I've been wanting to do this analysis for a bit now, but I also want to do thorough research before I did anything or said anything. And what I found literally killed me. The BSD fandom's misinformation needs to be stopped. I am so serious. We spread so much misinfo, it is actually concerning. But before I delve in, let me say that we're dividing this video into 3 sections as always. The first will cover Nikolai Gogol and his connection to the anime boy. The second will analyze our dear Nikolai and his views on sanity and freedom. And the third will talk about what I believe his future in the manga is and my little end of video rants. So without further ado, let's dive into... He wasn't gay! He was not gay. Oh my god. I cannot emphasize how ashamed I am that the BSD fandom had a part in this theory being taken as something that actually happened when there are multiple accounts of his letters with his lover who was a woman. Oh my god. I know, literally the shock of the century, but enough joking around, let's talk about Mikola and his relation to Nikolai. Doing research on him was a really fun but really lengthy task since a lot of debates surrounding him are about his heritage and not his works and him as a person. However, I'd say after reading up on him that Asagiri did a wonderful job with his personality. The thing about BSD is that the authors are not what inspires the character, but their works are what translates into the person they are. A great example of this is Nakahara Chuya. Despite the fact that his temper was insane and he definitely had some unchecked anger issues, his works were surrounded by a sort of emotional melancholy, and we see that in the Chuya in BSD. The same goes for Dazai. The reason he's so similar to his IRL counterpart is because his personality is inspired by the main character of No Longer Human, Yozo, who is also a self-insert of sorts. Yes, some elements of the IRL authors tie into the character, for example physical appearance and habits, but ultimately the guide for their personalities is their works. Remember, BSD is about the authors living on through their works. In Nikolai's case, his personality is based off the theme of Nikolai's works, comedy and dark satire. Now, the modern definition of satire is kids on TikTok pretending to be cringe, but in the case of literature, satirical works point out the flaws of a certain topic by thinly veiling it under a comedic mask. Kinda like the way Nikolai hides his deep conflict with his own beliefs under a mask of funny little quips and jokes. A fun fact to note is that Nikolai was really great at impressions and considered theater and acting, which I think is just really fun. Another interesting thing to know about Nikolai was that he was a fairly well-respected author. That was until the Catholic Church reviewed his works and criticized him heavily. The church had the ultimate say over what was acceptable and what wasn't, and so for this reason, people who admired him began turning on him as well, to the point that the majority of the public began resenting Nikolai. He was religious, mind you, but a personal theory of mine is that his criticism of the Russian provincial bureaucracy didn't sit well with them and consequently had him ostracized by the public. In his last few years, Nikolai traveled a lot and even became close to a priest friend of his named Konstantinovsky. It was him who further enforced the mindset that Nikolai's works were sinful. It's heavily believed that all the criticisms and pressure by his friend were the reasons he spiraled further and further into depression until it began affecting his health. He allegedly burned his unreleased works by pure accident, claiming learning that the devil was playing tricks on him. Now, Nikolai's death is a mystery. Some say he refused food and died of starvation within 9 days. Some say it was the church that murdered him since his body was found face down in his grave. Some even say he was poisoned or that his treatment was carried out wrongly in the hospital. Now, time to debunk the misconception. Nikolai Gogol was not a gay man. He never confessed his homosexuality to any priests. He never even expressed homosexual urges except a few throwaway lines in his works. Many articles will tell you that he never loved anyone, not even a woman, but that's not true because he did have a lover, a Russian woman named Anna. Her family even looked up to Nikolai as a great writer and their correspondences were often. But that begs the question, where did the rumor that he's gay come from? Well, in his autobiographical work, Nights at the Villa, there is a segment which is a little gay. I'll put it on screen for you guys to read. But another factor is that the church made it a mission to ruin his reputation, and I believe part of that is by letting this rumor slip by. Many people don't even know of Anna's existence. So yes, Nikolai was not in fact gay. Misconception debunked. Another really gorgeous and heartbreaking piece of information came from a factor that's very close to Nikolai in BSD. His work called Inspector was perceived as many as simply satirical with no depth, but Nikolai repeatedly tried to explain that he put a deeper meaning into this specific work, that everyone should, in his own words, look at his soul. Look at his soul. A huge part of Nikolai's character is that he wants to be understood, is that his fight for freedom is only challenged by his internal humanity. He was not desperate to be understood by someone, but when someone did understand him, it touched his heart, it touched his soul. It made him question what he really wanted. Nikolai in BSD is a gorgeous characterization of Nikolai's struggles as a writer, of how people took his works simply at face value and labeled them as comedic when there was more depth that he wanted them to see. He wanted to be understood. Before I wrap up this segment, my friend Momo gave me some fun facts and I want to read some of the ones that relate to Nikolai and BSD a lot. As a child, Nikolai liked to knit and sew, specifically loved making dresses for his sisters and made scarves for himself. This relates to how BSD's Nikolai can stitch skin and make it look like an expensive collared shirt. Ain't he the cutest? He loved munching on sugar cubes and carried them everywhere. This isn't related to Nikolai, I just think it's cute. He was really close to Alexander Pushkin and even said that his happiness died alongside his old friend, claiming that all the good qualities he had were because of him. I really liked reading about their friendship and I wish Asagiri did something with it, but also I understand why he didn't. Reading about Nikolai was honestly just a really fun and insightful experience. I'll leave the links to some interesting articles in the description if you want to check them out yourself too. So now, let's discuss. The first thing I want to talk about with this segment is Nikolais Design. When it comes to character design BSD, Asagiri and Harakawa are always cooking a 5-course meal. Whether it's Beast Kunekita's blue tie, Dagai's bandages, Atsushi and Akutagawa's hair, and every gorgeous little detail. And among well thought out designs, I say Nikolai has one of the best in the entirety of the manga. Hi everyone, my name is fashion designer Cash and welcome to a segment I'll call Character Design Breakdown. A huge conflict in the fandom is whether Nikolai is a clown or a jester. One thing that annoys me is that people believe calling him a clown instead of a jester means you're essentially not taking him seriously, which is even funnier because Nikolai is a clown, and he's been called as much by the manga itself. More than that, just look at his design. The scar across his eye is meant to look like clown makeup, while his pants are designed after those puffy pants clowns usually have. Even his hat resembles that of early day clowns. He is a clown, guys. Upon doing research, I found out that the dub of the anime actually refers to Nikolai as a jester for whatever reason, even though the manga refers to him as a clown. And I don't know about you guys, but I'm trusting Asagiri more than the people who made Nikolai look like this. The reason he's presented as a clown is because he's a fool to his own heart, a fool to humanity, and a fool to Fyodor's plans. More on that later. Another aspect of his design is the black and white theme of it. The black and white are symbolism for Nikolai's internal struggles and the beliefs in him that fight for dominance. On one hand, there's his desperation to be free, to break his earthly chains of emotion. On the other hand is his desire to be understood. But the thing is, to be understood is to bare your soul to someone, is to trust them with your heart, and to do that is to allow yourself to be chained to them. Meanwhile, to be free is to break those chains. These desires are complete opposites, just like the colors black and white. Nikolai's color palette is yet another example of his conflict with his own emotions, and the way they're presented as even represents how they play an equal role in his self-complication. Okay, that's all for character design breakdown. Back to you, regular Cash. Go fuck yourself, fashion designer Cash. Nobody likes you. Anyways, we first meet Nikolai when he shows up in front of Mushitaro in a police outfit, and we get our first bout of dialogue. It's Nikolai who introduces the readers to the Decay, and I think that's really fitting for someone who is essentially the Decay showman. Anyways, his most significant moments pre-Chainsaw are the conversations he has with Atsushi Atsushi, and the one he has with the government official Tanzo Tonen. With Atsushi, the interaction starts as the basic speech where our villains usually introduce themselves and their motivations. But what really sticks out most in this interaction is another detail of Nikolai's great design, namely the metallic card over his eye. What we learn here is that Nikolai hides his untainted eye, not the one with the scar over it. Now, we've all heard the phrase, the eyes are the window to the soul, and this eye of Nikolai's is unscarred, untainted by the world. This eye is a representation of Nikolai's true nature, and that's why he hides it. This is a direct parallel to the way he masks his true emotions, by quite literally masking his eye. And that's why when he removes it, the words he speaks are always the genuine and whole truth. That is Nikolai bearing his soul. We learn from Mikola's own works that he wanted people to understand him and look into his soul. He wanted people to see the deeper meaning behind his works. He is always telling the truth when he takes off that card, and I find that a really interesting parallel to Fyodor. Where we can never know when Fyodor is lying or when he's telling the truth, there is a clear indicator for when Nikolai is being honest and when he's masking his true emotions. And that's why when Nikolai says he's perfectly sane, he is telling the truth. I can understand why people assume this was him in denial or simply toying with Atsushi, since he says, "Don't lend your ear to a clown" in the same conversation. But I'm here to clarify that Nikolai was telling the truth. He is sane and so much more than he wants to be. But the thing that separates him from most sane people is the fact that he has freedom, and how desperate he is to achieve it is not a place many would go. At the most, someone would consider breaking out their cage the way he has, but never going as far as to do what he has done. So yes, Nikolai himself is sane because he does feel the guilt of his actions, but his ideologies are not sane. And for that reason, it creates confusion and conflict. And that gives us the perfect segue into our next point of his character, Nikolais' ideology. The thing about Nikolai is that he is conflicted. Many argue that what he wants is freedom. Many argue that what he wants is someone to understand him, and this is something he wants more than freedom. And I believe that that's incorrect. Let's look back at his color scheme. Black and white are presented evenly. These colors are a metaphor for his ideals. He wants both equally. But as I said earlier, you can't have both because they're complete opposites. To have someone who understands him, he will need to tie himself down, and that would make freedom unachievable. And something he doesn't realize is that no matter what, freedom will always be unachievable. Nikolai says he pities the government official because he doesn't realize that he's in a cage, the cage of his own mind. But what makes Nikolai a clown, a fool, is that he doesn't realize that he is in a cage as well. One that he has built himself with the false hope that he could ever escape his own mind, because the more he tries, the thicker the bars of that cage become. The more he tries to fight his own mind, the more he becomes a puppet to the shortcomings of his own ideologies. And so he joined the Decay in the hopes of being a part of this organization that opposes God would help him free himself. And then he meets Fyodor and his second want. Fyodor tells him exactly what he wants to hear. Fyodor tells him that his motivations are brilliant. Fyodor makes him feel like someone understands him. He makes him want to open his heart to someone and have them understand. And Fyodor is what makes him truly conflicted on his own emotions. He makes him believe that someone understands it when Fyodor does not understand him. He only tells Nikolai what he wants to hear to use him. And you may wonder, well, Fyodor has never used Nikolai, has he? To which I ask you to turn your attention to Mersault. When Nikolai and Sigma break Fyodor and Daze out of their cells, Fyodor does not look surprised in the slightest. I mean, we all know that Fyodor has a plan for everything, right? So is it really a coincidence that Nikolai waltzed in and inadvertently led them to the scenario where Fyodor's death would revive him into Bram's body in the exact place where he needed to be? Is it really a coincidence that he would be granted the opportunity to test Dazai once more before taking over the world? My belief is that no, it's not a coincidence. If every action of Fyodor's has a motive, be it landing himself in Mersault so that he could watch the hunting dogs and agency fight in peace, be it allowing Fukuchi to believe in a 36-year war that would never happen, or simply just hiding the nature of his ability, there's no reason for him to manipulate Nikolai for just shits and giggles and nothing else. Many believe that Nikolai is actually in on Fyodor's plan and knows that he's alive, and I think that's not true, unfortunately. Nikolai's grief right now being an act would contradict a lot of elements about his character, but I'd also like to bring to the table a discussion that many people dislike. Nikolai is allowing his heart to be tied down to Fyodor. Now, before I delve into this, let me say that no, I am not calling him dumb. If anything, Nikolai knowing about Fyodor's grip on him is a sign of emotional intelligence. Yes, he's aware that Fyodor is using him, and that causes two conflicts. The first is that he needs to kill Fyodor to free himself of his chain, but the second causes him to wonder what he really wants. When Fyodor quote-unquote dies, Nikolai's body language is completely different. He's not celebrating the fact that he's rid of Fyodor. He's not even smiling a little. In this moment, Nikolai is well and truly regretting his actions. Is this really what he wanted? Is this freedom? Did killing his one and only friend really free him? And yet it didn't. If anything, Fyodor's chain on his heart is tighter and heavier. And for that reason, he embraces his severed arm, confused on what even to say. And now, all he wants is Fyodor back. All he wants is to be tied down to him. All he wants is to be understood by him. But no. More than that, he is defeated because despite the fact he should be free, he still feels the emotion of wanting. He has failed to free himself of his care for Fyodor. But am I saying that's all he wanted from the beginning? No, not in the slightest. In another scenario where Fyodor continued to live, he would continue to fight for his freedom. Logically, there is no way Nikolai could ever be happy because of the cage that he's built around himself. If Fyodor lived, he'd continue to question himself, but since Fyodor died, that chain should break, right? But it didn't, and he knows that damn well now. Let's look at the way Nikolai talks about Fyodor. Let me quote a couple of his lines from the manga. He saw the essence of my soul. The moment I met him, I knew my life became something completely different. The thing is, Nikolai truly and deeply loved Fyodor. And no, I'm not using love as a term of shipping, but as a word for his genuine emotions. If you truly see the word love and only think of it in the context of romance, then I'm sorry, but this manga isn't for you. Because love is one of the biggest themes in BSD. Dazai loved Odasaku and loves Atsushi. Fukuzawa loves Rampo, his son. Kunekira grows to love Akutagawa in peace the way he's never been loved before. And Nikolai loved Fyodor. And Nikolai hated the emotions Fyodor made him feel, so he attempted to murder him, praying that it would fix him. And yet he allowed himself to adore Fyodor. He allowed himself to believe that Fyodor was his best friend even though they exchanged just a few words. He allowed himself to feel those emotions, thinking that killing Fyodor would stop them. He allowed himself to tie his heart down to Fyodor, believing that killing him would change anything. He was so focused on escaping the cage of his mind that he disregarded the lock that he was putting over the one over his heart. Because once you allow yourself to feel those emotions of pure and genuine love, they become stronger the longer your heart remains dissatisfied with the outcome. A wonderful parallel to this that my friend Groovy pointed out is that in Mikola's novel Diary of a Madman, after the date November 11th, the rest of the dates become mixed up and disoriented. That date is Fyodor's birthday, and a wonderful parallel to Nikolai's views on what he really wants, becoming disoriented when he meets Fyodor. And that's how Nikolai's arc ends, wishing for another ending, another solution, another possibility where Fyodor didn't die. He is unsatisfied with himself, wondering if this is truly what he wanted, whether freedom is supposed to feel like a cage around his heart. And before I wrap up this video, I'd like to discuss another aspect of Fyodor and Nikolai's relationship just briefly. And that, of course, is the religious imagery and the undertones of their dynamic. We all know that Fyodor is religious, right? That's common knowledge at this point. And part of that aspect being portrayed of his character is the nature of his relationships. Many people consider his relationship to Dazai adjacent to that of a believer of God and a non-believer. I'll save my opinions on that for the next Fyodor video. But what many people don't note is the religious undertones of Nikolai's relationship and codependency on Fyodor. What is the nickname every character in the series gives Fyodor? Demon Dostoevsky. That's tied to his religious theme as well. He sees himself as a savior while everyone else sees him as a demon. And yet, Nikolai sees him as the opposite. Nikolai reveres him, believing that since meeting him, his life has changed in its trajectory forever. Nikolai sees Fyodor as not a demon, but as an angel. Part of this plays into this official art. Now, many people argue that it isn't official, but it actually is, but was drawn by an anthology artist, not Harakawa. Now, let's dissect this image. We know for a fact that Nikolai wears gloves, but in this art, one of those gloves is absent. That's symbolism for him dropping his facade in the same way he's not wearing his mask in this art. You'll also notice that his fingers are inside Fyodor's mouth, so, making that fact known. That is symbolism too. That's symbolism for Nikolai willingly allowing Fyodor to consume him in a sense. Mind you, his opposite glove is on, but the hand he uses to portray that consumption is bare. This is quite literally the art telling us that Nikolai allows Fyodor to consume his truest self. And Fyodor, he's looking off to the side. He's not reciprocating at all, simply allowing Nikolai to do as he pleases. The same way he allows Nikolai to believe that he is his friend. The same way he allows him to delude himself into that belief. That's more proof of Fyodor's lack of care for Nikolai, because their canon relationship is indeed one-sided. Nikolai seeing him as something to revere is quite literally the opposite of how everyone else sees Fyodor, and I find that so interesting. He really is the most unique character in this entire manga, so far at least. But that's just the current reality. What about the future? What lies ahead for Nikolai? He's going to realize that he's actually in love with me, all sorry. Now, in BSD, characters go through arcs that expand their current characters. Rampo going through the perfect crime arc expanded on how he believes he's supposed to be the person in the agency everyone relies on and that he can't let them down. Dazai's arc in Mersal gave us a window to his and Fyodor's relationship and dynamic. Atsushi and Akutagawa's arcs always add a new layer of trust over their dynamic. Nikolai only has 2 arcs so far. The first was his exposition as an antagonist and the second was his plot to kill Fyodor. The reason you didn't see me talk about his and Sigma's dynamic is because at the end of the day, the motivation of that arc was to get to Fyodor, and for that reason, they don't really have a solid relationship, at least yet. Now, there are 2 things Asagiri can do. The first thing he can do is pull an Ivan Goncharov and scrap Nikolai completely, never to be seen again or expanded on. Scary, I know. The second thing he can do honestly depends on Fyodor. What a lot of people are unwilling to accept is that Nikolai's character is tied to Fyodor. His existence is to define our villain. Where everyone sees Fyodor as a demon, Nikolai saw him as a savior, an angel. And let me emphasize that no, Fyodor isn't his entire personality. A character similar to Nikolai is Katai, but Katai's entire personality isn't Konekida either. But Fyodor and Konekida are the characters that they are here to define. At some point, we're going to have to admit at least some of the 94 characters in this manga are going to be more of a support for the more plot-relevant ones. I'll say it, Nikolai's relationship with Fyodor is one of his most important aspects, and I'll say it, Nikolai is here for Fyodor. Do you know why I'm saying all this? Because at some point when Nikolai leaves this manga, you will be disappointed, alright? If you are someone who believes that Nikolai serves a much larger purpose than Fyodor and might even become a part of the main cast, you need to come to the terms that that will not happen. Do not delude yourself into thinking something will happen and then be disappointed that it didn't happen when everyone else knew that it wasn't going to. And that's why Nikolai's future depends on Fyodor right now. It's about time that we accept that when Fyodor leaves this manga, Nikolai will too. But that's just what I'm deducing from his previous arcs, mind you. Nikolai is Asagiri's character, and if he wants to introduce him to more characters and expand on him, that's well and good, but looking at his current status, that ain't happening anytime soon. My only prediction is that Nikolai will be angry at his grief being toyed with, but until we get anything else on him, that is where his current arc comes to an end. So that's it. That's Nikolai's purpose in the story. He is a stellar display of the conflict of humanity, of sanity, and of emotion and living. And for that reason, I feel that Nikolai is one of the most impactful, unique, and beautiful characters in this story. He is someone who is inevitably trapped in this cage that he built around himself. And who, my dear viewers, and who is to blame? Is it him? Is it Fyodor? Is it his heart or mind? Or is it the fact that despite what Nikolai tells himself, he will never ever escape the cage of his heart? Fyolai canon. Fyolai canon. Fyolai canon. Do you know how hard it was for me? Do you know how hard it was for me not to make a gay joke every few seconds? Fyolai is my thing and I wasn't allowed to. Because I'm supposed to be logical. The only thing that would feel better right now were if we were to buy my Patreon only for $3. Anyways, hey everybody, I know this is a very early video. I love Nikolai. I was so passionate about this video. This is one of my favorite videos I've made so far. It was just so fun to make. I edited this and recorded this in a day because of how much I love Nikolai. But, you know, enough of that for now. First off, as always, go to Arab.org. Go click the site. Remember, Palestine is not free yet. The ceasefire has just happened and they still need food and resources. Other than that, once again, spread the tags that I'll leave in the description for Turkish women. Please do research on this topic. I always tell you guys to do research. Go do your research. There's a post in my community tab talking about them. And other than that, I just love Nikolai, you guys. He's such a beautiful character. Actually, I want to talk about that one detail that a few people talked about in his last panel where he embraces Fyodor's arm, where his hat design is actually switched, and some people say that's deliberate, some people say that's a mistake. And I wasn't sure which one of these were true, so I left that part out. I really want to talk about it. Another thing I want to talk about is how gay Nikolai is, and how canon Fyolai is. Cash Patreon for only $3. Other than that, I was just so happy to make this video. Thank you to my friends for helping me. Thank you to my patroners for all the support. They are amazing people. They are just so kind every time I upload something to my Patreon. They're so nice. And other than that, I'm not sure what I'm doing these days, but see y'all soon in the next one. Bye!